we welcome you. Tonight we have three speakers, and they are Leah Curtis, Policy Counsel and Senior Director of Member Engagement for Ohio Farm Bureau Federation. We also have David Thomas, the Ashtabula County Auditor, and Heather Hall, the Ashtabula County CAUV Specialist. And before I turn everything over to Leah, there is a tradition with Woodland Wednesdays to tell a few jokes before we get going. So, you know, I had a tree joke, but I decided to leave it out. And I had a logging joke, but it fell flat. And I had a tax joke, but I forgot where I filed it last year. So with that, I'm going to turn everything over to Leah. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with her, or Mandy can share. No, Mandy's going to have to turn over.
Yep, she can share right from hers. She should be good.
Perfect. All right, Leah, take it away.
All right, hopefully everybody can see that PowerPoint that I just pulled up. You made me really nervous there for a minute, Susan, because I thought you were going to make me tell jokes. You did not tell me. So thank you all for having me today. As was stated, I'm Policy Counsel and Senior Director of Member Engagement for the Farm Bureau. That means I'm the lawyer. I advise the rest of the policy department, then I oversee all of our legal advocacy. And CAUV and taxes happen to be one of my main programs. So tonight, we are going to talk a little bit about CAUV. We will talk specifically with CAUV about woodland values, about conservation measures and values. We will also then talk about OFTL, the Ohio Forest Tax Law Program, and some basics of that. And then Mandy did ask me to touch briefly on ag districts. It goes along really well nicely with these two other programs. So we'll just highlight a few pieces of that program as well for all of you. So I'm going to start with CAUV. CAUV is a bit of a complicated program. It's one that I often do, whole evening presentations or even longer on. So I'm going to give you the highlights tonight. And I know that our friends from the Auditor's Office are also going to go a little bit more deep on their side of this program. But basically, CAUV is a property tax program that values land for its agricultural use only, rather than its market value. So if you look at any other piece of property, a house, a gas station, a retail store, those are all going to be valued for tax purposes at their market value, what value they would change hands between a willing seller and a willing buyer. When we look at program lands on the program, the CAUV program, they are instead going to be taxed at an agricultural use value. Now, to get into the CAUV program and have that benefit, you will have to show that you have a commercial agricultural use. So there does have to be some sort of profit-seeking agricultural activity happening on that farm. You have to prove $2,500 of gross annual income from that agricultural activity. You will also have to show 3 years of qualifying use prior to enrolling. Now, this one gets people a little concerned. Keep in mind that if you, for example, bought a piece of property, the person you bought it from has always had it on CAUV, you get to use their years. You get to use their 3 years to enroll. In contrast, if you bought a piece of property that nobody has done anything on, it's never been farmed, it's never been managed, there's never been any commercial agricultural operation on it, then it is going to have to wait that 3 years. You're going to have to start, operate for 3 years, and then qualify for CAUV. A few special circumstances with CAUV is that you can qualify with federal conservation program land. So if you enroll in CRP or CREP, one of those programs with NRCS or FSA, that is a way to qualify without having a commercial agricultural use. And up to 25% of your land can be used in private conservation use. This is a really important part of the program that was added in the early 2000s. To make sure that if people were putting in things like buffer strips, wetlands, that land did not get cut out of the program because it technically wasn't being used for commercial agricultural use. Now, one very important thing to know about CAUV is that once you enroll, you are in that program, you'll have to renew every year. If you choose not to renew, or you choose to change your property to a non-agricultural use, then you will pay back a 3-year recoupment penalty. And that recoupment will be equal to the savings that you enjoyed over the last 3 years. CAUV is intended to be a farmland preservation program. It's to try to help keep land in commercial agricultural use. And so that's why that penalty exists. The penalty will largely depend on where you are and what your market values are in the area, because of course you're paying the difference between what you paid on CAUV and what you would have paid on market value. So that, depending on what your market values in your area can be, that can change how much your recoupment can be. So what does this mean for woodlands? If you are managing your woodlands, meaning you intend to commercially timber that property, and you've managed it for at least 3 years, you can apply for the CAUV program for your managed timber woodlands. Management usually means that you have the use of a forest management plan. That typically should be created by a qualified forester, and that can help you understand what you have, what are the types of trees that have value on your property, what is not valuable that maybe you should remove, if you have any sort of noxious weed or different types of weed issues that need to be taken care of. That plan can help you identify those and really get you on a good path to having a profitable and healthy working forest. The other kind of caveats for woodlands in CAUV is what we call non-commercial woodland. So if you have other qualifying commercial agricultural property, let's say you have at least 10 acres of pasture that you have cattle or sheep in, or maybe you have at least 10 acres of row crops, corn or beans. If you have at least that 10 acres of something else, you can bring in what the law calls non-commercial woodlands into CAUV as well. That non-commercial woodlands does not have to be managed. It can just, it can just be there as woods. And this provision in the law is really meant for those circumstances where you have pasture and you're allowing your cows or your sheep to use that woods on the edge of the pasture for some sort of, shelter, way to get out of the weather. Or it's attached to your crop fields. That provides an ecological and an environmental benefit typically. So we want to make sure that that can still come in. People don't get penalized for having that woodland at the edge of that crop field. So those are kind of the two ways that you can have woodland in the CAUV program. So now we've talked about getting in the program. Let's talk about what the actual values are. The CAUV value is going to always be calculated by the Department of Taxation. So your local auditor is going to appraise your property for its market value, and they're going to do that about every 3 years. But CAUV is calculated at the tax department because they use a very complicated calculation that uses usually about 7 years of data for lots of different factors. We do base it on the 3 main crops in the state, and that's corn, beans, and wheat. And then every individual soil type gets a value. In Ohio, we have 3,500 plus soil values. So every soil type in Ohio gets a value. It gets a cropland and a woodland value. And so you've heard me say corn, beans, and wheat. You're like, why are we using corn, beans, and wheat when I have woodland? So the point of the calculation is to look at the productivity of that soil. And those are the most common crops. Those are the crops that we have all the data on productivity from. So those are used to give us that base cropland value. Now to get to a woodland value, the tax department then takes deductions off of the cropland value. So first of all, they always take a clearing deduction. That clearing deduction is around $1,000. They do review it every year. And then for any soil types that are poorly drained, somewhat poorly drained, or very poorly drained, they will also get an additional tile drainage deduction. I believe that's around $800, a little over $800 today. So they're going to make those 2 deductions for a lot of those soils. There's a few soils that will also get a surface drainage deduction. It's not as common. Those are kind of rare across the state, but there is a small class of soils that would get an additional surface drainage deduction. So woodland values are typically much lower than cropland values because of those deductions. But at the end of the day, all woodland values are bounded by a minimum of $230 per acre. So any woodland that is on the CAUV program, it's not going to go below that value of $230 per acre. It may be higher, but it can't be lower. So at the end of the day, if you're on the CAUV program, your taxes are going to be a combination of that CAUV value, which is unique to your soil type, and your local tax rate. Because tax rates will be varying widely across the state, we vary from about 30 mils of a tax rate in Lawrence County to 220 in a district in Cuyahoga County. That means that your soil types are the same across the state. If you have Miami silt loam soil in Geauga County, then it has the same value as Miami silt loam in Franklin County and in Montgomery County and in Darke County. But your tax rates are all different because your tax rates are voted on locally by you and your fellow citizens. One other very important part of CAUV is that, unlike pretty much all the rest of our property taxes, you have an opportunity to affect your property value by the way you're using your property. So if you are using your property either as a federal conservation program, or you're using up to 25% of it for those private conservation practices to prevent soil erosion, that will lower your value down to $230 per acre where you have that conservation measure. So this is where we made this change in the law in 2017. And this was in part because we wanted to make sure people were not being penalized for using conservation measures. Prior to this change, if you have cropland, woodland, whichever, you were going to pay taxes on that property as if it was producing a crop. By putting this into the law, we were able to better recognize that conservation land, that it is not producing a crop, it's not producing income, but it still is an important part of farming and of our land conservation measures. Now, just like with the CAUV program overall, there are some caveats to this. You're getting this benefit by using this conservation land, getting this conservation value. So you will have to maintain that conservation use for at least 3 years, or you'll have to pay back the difference. So if you leave it in for 3 years, and then you decide after 36 months that you don't want to put it there anymore, you want to plant something in that buffer strip instead, that's fine. The law is fine with that. If you do it before that 36 months, though, you will go pay a regular CAUV value. And to enroll in this, you do have to prove that you're doing these actual conservation measures. So for a federal conservation program, that's typically going to be supplying your contract and maps to show where the program land is on your farm. And for a private conservation measure, it's going to be a map showing where that conservation measure has been installed. That allows your auditor to line up your soil types and make sure you're getting that reduction on the correct soil types. So it's a little bit more extra paperwork, but it can result in a really good benefit for you for your property. So now I'm going to switch to Ohio Forest about whether you could be in CAUV and forest tax law on the same parcel. Unfortunately, you cannot. You do have to pick one program or the other. The law does not allow you to be in both at the same time. They both have their pros and cons, and I'll kind of go over some of those differences here in just a second. But the Ohio Forest Tax Law, where CAUV gives you a different value, the Ohio Forest Tax Law reduces your tax rate. So you're still going to use that market value, but your tax rate is going to be cut in half. So I will say I've worked with landowners all over the state, and I've seen probably 88 different ways that this is shown on a tax bill or on an online portal. Sometimes they show it as cutting the value in half. Sometimes it's the tax rate. Mechanically, it all works out the same, that your taxes pretty much are cut in half from being on forest tax law. I'm just going to highlight the requirements. I'm sure that the auditors can talk a little bit more about these as well, but you do need to have 10 acres of working forest. That's not counting any kind of big clearings or breaks in that forest. You will have to cooperate and plan with the ODNR forestry professionals. So they will assist you with a forestry management plan. They will provide you information and direction on what you should be doing, what will be the best actions for you to take. They will ask you to mark your boundaries. So you'll have to go out and spray paint those boundaries so people, know where your boundary lines are. And you're going to have to stay in compliance with that plan that you come up with them. So they're going to come out and inspect. They're going to come out and check, make sure everything's going the way it should. It's looking good. You're following that plan. But that results in you getting that tax benefit of about a half reduction on your taxes. So I just want to kind of go over the differences quickly between OFTL and CAUV. They're both really great programs. And some people like one better than the other. I wouldn't say one is better than the other. It just depends on what your priorities are and how it, works out on your own property. Period. That if you have not ever done any kind of agriculture on your property, you're going to have to start and wait that 3 years before enrolling. Forest tax law does not have that waiting period. So you can kind of use that to help you get started if you're in that position of totally new property that's never been touched. With CAUV, you do have that recoupment penalty if you would ever leave the program. Most people do not end up leaving the program. Most people are in and they stay in until they sell the property. Typically, when they sell the property, it's the buyer that ends up paying that recoupment, though that is something that can be discussed at your sale. But OFTL does not have a penalty. If you're in OFTL, you decide it's not for you, it's not working out for you, you're not going to pay back a penalty. You're just going to go back to that regular taxation. So your taxes are going to go up and you'll just stay at that regular taxation rate. CAUV is going to value your land on its ag potential, whereas forest tax law is going to deduct your taxes about in half. Whether one is better than the other is really dependent on your land. Usually your auditor can assist you with giving you at least an estimate of what it looks like with the two different programs. Historically, a lot of areas that have high market values, CAUV is usually a better program from a tax perspective, but you do have to remember that recoupment penalty, that 3-year waiting period. But OFTL can sometimes be a better deal depending on where you live. And then lastly, with CAUV, those tax values are calculated by the tax department, but largely the program's administered by your auditor. You're going to enroll with them, you're going to renew with them every year, and they're going to be doing the inspection on your property to make sure that you still qualify for CAUV. With forest tax law, the ODNR Division of Forestry is largely going to administer that with you. They're going to be the ones you talk to about the plan. They're going to come out and do your inspection, and they're basically going to let the auditor know that you do qualify and to apply that tax benefit for you. But you'll mostly be working directly with DNR if you're in the OFTL program. So I did want to talk on ag districts just quickly. Ag districts are not a tax program, so I want to be very clear about that. They do not provide a tax benefit. They are a separate program from CAUV and OFTL. You could be an ag district and not be in CAUV, though that'd be a little strange. But it is very common that people are in CAUV and not enrolled in an ag district. Ag districts are another farmland preservation tool that we have in our toolbox in the law. Like CAUV, it was put into place to try to help identify farmland for planning purposes and to provide a few benefits to try to assist farmers in keeping that land in production. So to get into an ag district, you do have to apply. Again, you'll do that with your county auditor, and you basically meet the same qualifications as CAUV, 10 acres or $2,500 of agricultural income from your commercial agricultural enterprise. There's 3 main benefits to ag districts. The first is deferral of water, sewer, or electric assessments to your farmland. So if you live in an area where maybe they put in a water line, they're going to assess every acre of property for that water line. If you are in an ag district, you can defer the assessment that does not apply to your house. So anything that's, your open farmland, you can defer that assessment and only pay what applies to your residents or any residents on your property. It is a deferral though. So it will be charged if you come out of the ag district. So it doesn't make it exempt, it doesn't make it go away, but it does mean that it does not come due and to be paid until that land is no longer in the ag district and no longer in agricultural use. Second benefit for any lawsuits that are filed against you relative to your agricultural activities. Now, we did have a change in the law recently that made that apply to your CAUV enrollment. So if you're enrolled in CAUV, you actually have the benefit of this defense too. But what that means is if a neighbor files a lawsuit against you saying, you know, your agricultural activities are causing a nuisance, they're smelly, they make too much noise, I don't like the dust, all those kind of things. There's a few limitations, but it gives you a defense to that lawsuit. As long as you are engaging in best management practices, normal agricultural practices. As I mentioned, I am a lawyer, and so I have seen this defense be very useful to farmers in my time as a lawyer. Oftentimes, nuisance lawsuits can get dismissed much quicker because of this defense, which means a lot less money in attorneys. So that is a really good benefit. Again, you do have that if you're in CAUV. If you were in OFTL, you would not have that automatically. So you'd want to maybe consider enrolling in an ag district to add on that benefit for yourself. So we don't see used too often is a special review of certain eminent domain procedures. So if the government or another agency, like a utility, proposes to take your property, and they're proposing to take 10 acres or 10%, whichever is larger, of your property, then that, and it's in an ag district, it will trigger a second review before that eminent domain can go through. So the Department of Agriculture will have to review that eminent domain project, and then they can choose to, at the end of it, they can choose to lift it up to the governor and ask the governor to stop that eminent domain procedure. It has not happened very often. There has been a few times where that eminent domain procedure has been used to stop a major eminent domain taking of farmland. And so what that may mean is that maybe that project gets rerouted, maybe it goes a different direction, or maybe there's some sort of impact or restitution that's given to buy new farmland to add onto that farm. Again, it doesn't happen very often, but it is a bonus with that ag district. With ag districts, when you enroll, you are enrolling for 5 years. So unlike CAUV, where you do it every single year, ag district is going to be 5 years for your term. Now, the thing about this 5-year term is that if you just stay in for that 5 years and then you decide, you know what, I didn't need any of those things, I don't want to use that, I don't want to do that anymore, there's actually no penalty for not renewing. With CAUV, if you don't renew, we consider that a conversion under the law, and you will pay that recoupment penalty like we talked about. But ag district is not going to have that penalty. If you do leave during the 5 years, there will be an additional penalty though. It's a percentage of your CAUV recoupment based on the interest rate. So it's not the same amount as your recoupment. It's not as high as a recoupment would be, but there would be a small penalty. I personally have not seen anyone pay a penalty for an ag district removal, mainly because people wait the 5 years. Most of the time they can wait that time. The only time I can think of a penalty being more likely is if there was some sort of development occurring. And in that case, that's probably going to be negotiated as part of the sale. So ag district can be a really good thing. It's also something that's just used for identifying farmland. So when we can say to the auditor how many acres are in ag districts, the PUCO and the Ohio Prior Siting Board use that as a measure of impacts to farmland when they're looking at or projects. That's one thing they're looking at. A lot of permit programs at the state level will look at whether there are ag districts and CAUV property in an area and whether an impact will be made to those when they're making permit decisions. So it's also used for that benefit of planning and kind of long-term land use planning as well. So that is my slides. So stop my share and I just want to check the chat and see what we got here.
Yeah, we got 3 questions.
Okay.
So the first one would be, how can I find out if prior owner was in a CAUV program?
So best thing to do for that would be to talk to the auditor. They can help you. They can let you know what that status was on that property. And then you'll be able to figure out whether you have to wait the 3 years or whether you've already got some years banked.
Okay. And if you have a property on CAUV now, but you purchase an adjacent property that is on Ohio Forest tax law, can the new property be switched to the CAUV without the 3-year waiting period?
So the 3-year waiting period is that for 3 years you have had a commercial agricultural operation on the property and it met the qualifications. If you can show for the last 3 years while it's been OFTL that it meets those qualifications, then you should be able to meet that waiting period already. If say you went on OFTL last year with that property, you may not have that 3 years yet. So it's going to depend on kind of how long you've been on OFTL and how well you can evidence that you've met those qualifications.
Okay. And then lastly, in 2017, CAUV went through a reassessment with the goal of dropping the CAUV tax rate that in previous years had skyrocketed. Farm Bureau had published that the CAUV rate should drop about 30%. This drop was supposed to roll out over a 5-year period. I'm in Lake County and in an ag district, and my CAUV did not decrease. I thought Lake County was in the last group to decrease. Do you know if these CAUV reductions have occurred in Lake? Yeah, so we have seen CAUV values decrease about 30% every year since 2017. Now, it does depend when your reappraisal or update. Lake County should have been in one of those 3 years. I'm not sure which year is your year for reappraisal and update, but I may be able to find it by the time our auditor friends are done speaking. We did phase in the changes to the calculation over a 6-year period. What we at Farm Bureau have always said is that we do have to wait for the data to come out. We can't predict what values will look like 5 years from now, because the calculation is actually based on very recent data. It's based on the most recent crop prices and the most recent costs in your budget. So we are very careful not to predict values, but what we did see in 17, 18, and 19 certainly were values decrease around 30%. Now, what happened in those years, which makes it a little harder to see sometimes, is that your residential values went up significantly in some of those years. So Lake County, I would guess, is that county that maybe has higher market values. And what you may have had is the year that you were reassessed, which happened in my county as well, our CAUV rates did go down significantly, but our houses went up. So it evened out on our tax bill. So you might just check what was the CAUV value after, because that'll just be representative of your farmland and will not include your actual houses in it. Okay, a few more. My farm is 50% woods and 50% tillable land, but is one parcel. This coming September will be my 3 years of farming the land. CAUV, will the woodlands get the tax break as well?
So that's going to depend on your acreage and your usage. So if you have 10 acres of tillable that you've been tilling, you've been cropping, and then you have extra woodland, if it's non-commercial, then that usually can come in. If you're managing that woodland, then that most likely can also come in. So it's going to depend on your acreage and your usage. My best advice always is to talk to your auditor. They are always very helpful with these questions and with kind of helping you prepare and get through that form. So, use that resource of your auditor's office, because they're usually very happy to help you with that.
All right, if you are granted as an ag district, are you from the ordinances?
No, an ag district does not exempt you from any sort of laws or ordinances. There are some exemptions that apply to ag property, particularly when it comes to zoning, but that is not dependent on your ag district or CAUV status. Ag district just provides you those benefits that I talked about. So deferral of your sewer, water, or electrical assessments, a nuisance defense, and an eminent domain review. It does not create any new exemptions by enrolling in the ag district.
All right. Very good. Well, that seems to, anything else before we cut Leah loose a little bit?
I will still stick around, so don't worry, I'll be here, but
Yes.
I am going to turn my camera off to save everybody's broadband, but I will be around.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Leah. And now we are going to turn it over to David Thomas and Heather Hall.
Thank you so much. We appreciate everyone taking the time tonight. Heather and I are going to touch base on a couple different things that Leah had talked about, maybe a little bit more in depth on some aspects, a little bit less on others. But we wanted to give you kind of a ground level of view of, kind of what an auditor's office does. And Leah is absolutely right. If you get one thing from tonight's discussion, it is definitely reach out to your county auditor's office. We're more than happy to help. We represent Ashtabula, so I'm the Ashtabula County Auditor. Heather is our CAUV Program Coordinator Specialist. I know in Lake and in Geauga, both of them, Chris and Lake and Chuck and Geauga, are more than happy to help talk with you. They also have staff who are dedicated to CAUV and to agriculture. So definitely reach out, ask questions. And so we'll go through real quick, kind of a couple different aspects, and then always happy to answer questions at the end too. So here's us, here's our emails. So if you do want to reach out to us, you can also Google our phone numbers, and emails are on our website as well. So definitely reach out. So we're going to talk on the actual application itself, kind of go through what inspections are like, our process of actually inspecting, a little bit more in depth on recoupment and our kind of perspective on recoupment. And remind you about the differences between the Ohio Forest Tax Law and CAUV and the auditor's role in that, and then have any questions from you. So Heather, if you would like to take it away.
Yeah, so I know Leah did a great job kind of starting to go over what CAUV means. So if you guys do have your 3 years of a commercial use in and are ready to apply, you must apply prior to the first or after the first Monday in January and up until the first Monday in March. And that's when we'll take new applications. And yeah, go ahead, David.
Oh, no, this is perfect.
Okay. So, and like Leah said, if you have 10 acres or more of cropland, then you can apply. Less than 10 acres, you have to show proof of income. With the forestry, if you have 10 acres or more on contiguous acres, that you have a forest management plan with your application. We also do see a lot of people that might have 5 acres of tillable land, and then they have maybe 20 acres of woods. So we would have, if you want to receive the CAUV on the cropland and the forestry, we would have you farm, that land, and then also have a forest management plan along with your application, so you can get the entire property for CAUV. When you are ready to apply for CAUV, when you come to the auditor's office, you're going to want to make sure you have the application, which we'll go over in just a second, a $25 filing fee, and a copy of your forest management plan. Sometimes we do require, if you're just in cropland, we do sometimes require a map, maybe to show. It might not be very easy on a map to see where you're farming. So we might have you mark out the areas that you're farming.
Yeah, and to Heather's point about that first piece, even last year, actually, I had a good friend of mine reach out to me on the first Tuesday in March and say, hey, I've got all my stuff for a CAUV all ready to go. Can I stop by your office? And I had to tell him, we're sorry, but this is a very legal deadline. And so we can't accept your application. So I made sure to text him on January 1st of this year and say, don't forget, turn in that application. So make sure you have those conversations with your county auditor and get those renewals or your initial applications in before that first Monday in March. And to Heather's point too about the forest management plan. So there are some counties who do not require a forest management plan. And one of the things you're going to see, and I don't want to ever speak for the county auditor, there's 88 of us across the state of Ohio, and there are 88 different interpretations, different ways of going about this process. Ohio Revised Code, if you've ever had the fun opportunity to read it, Sometimes it can be very straightforward, and other times it can be as clear as the mud that we're all experiencing with the snow right now. So definitely talk to your auditor in terms of how they interpret certain things. They'll be happy to explain it. But we do require that management plan because it actually, as one of our inspectors, along with Heather, Nate Paskey, who's with our soil and water, always says, it takes the guessing game out of our inspection. And we'll touch on inspections too, but that forest management plan is kind of your Bible and our Bible, and it's well worth the money for you to get before you do apply. And another kind of difference with our county, and it's, I don't know exactly the breakdown, for example, but how we interpret woodlands when it comes to CAUV, we, unless there's a strange circumstance, we will actually typically allow folks to immediately enter CAUV when they're applying for a woodlands CAUV program. And that's largely because, my interpretation, how I look at it, you're growing the crop, you're participating in agriculture by having those woods there. Having the woods preventing you from tilling, from planting. And so depending on the actual situation on the ground, we'll typically allow folks to enter right away with that management plan. And not every county does that. They have different interpretations, but that's how we kind of oversee that aspect of the program here in Ashtabula. So our next slide is the actual application itself. And Heather can kind of go over some commonly asked questions on the application.
Yeah, I know a lot of people bring it in and they get kind of scared, but it's actually really simple. The very top part where it says application number, county, tax year, that's what we will fill out. But really all you need is your name, phone number. Email is a big thing because we're trying to move things over to email, and your mailing address. So then number 3, we need all your parcel numbers that you want to apply for and your total deeded acres. Number 4, we have you fill out if you're farming less than 10 acres. We need to see what your gross income was for the last 3 years. Number 5, I'm sorry. 5 is where you're going to break down your acres, roughly how many acres are under a commodity crop. Like Leah kind of touched base with the difference between commercial timber and non-commercial woodlands. A home site for our office, we usually always designate 1 acre to your home site. If you have the conservation, again, that's where it's going to ask for your map. If it's in a conservation program, we need a copy of that contract. Then you'll have the total at the bottom. Number 6 is where it's going to ask who your farmer is if somebody's farming it other than you. We do have a lot of people that might rent out their ground. So that's a good way to put their name and number, because sometimes we might have a question and the people don't even know what's going on in their backfield. So if we need some information, it's easier. We have the farmer, we can contact him and see what's going on. And then your sign-in date at the bottom, and then there's a $25 application fee to go with that.
Yeah. So this I believe this application should be pretty uniform across the state in terms of the initial and the renewal. We actually send out in our renewals a step-by-step, and we have a step-by-step on our website too for the initial.
Like David said, Nathan Paskey from Soil and Water, as well as Sam Hawley. He's the owner of S. Hawley Lumber Company, LLC. They both actually do our inspections for all of our woodland properties. We tried to adapt the Ohio Forest Tax Law where we only kind of look at it every 5 years. It kind of made sense instead of trying to look at it every year. Our forestry CAUV properties are growing every day. We have a lot coming over to CAUV. So we try to look at it every 5 years, kind of depending on where you're at in your cycle. And then we do make sure that we inspect on year 1 when you first apply for CAUV. But at the bottom, there's Nathan and Sam's contact information. It's really great too to partner with Soil and Water, and having Sam, he also writes some management plans for us, and they've been great to work with, and they're very knowledgeable. It definitely helps me out a lot.
Yeah, so as Heather said, essentially Nate or Sam or Heather herself will take a look at that management plan that you submitted to our office, and we'll say, okay, on year 1 through 10, grapevines. And so on year one, we'll go out, look at the property, see how far along you are, see that you're at least having some activity and making some effort. And then in year 5, we'll go back out and we'll say, okay, it looks like grapevines have been removed. You're doing a good dent in invasive species. You're good to go. Or unfortunately, sometimes it occurs where, wait a second, it actually looks even worse than the first time we came out on the property. And so then there's a conversation between our office and the property owner of, you're not following your management plan. What are the action steps that we can take together to make sure that you're taking action on your plan? Our county, for traditional CAUV, we have north of 4,500 parcels in our county of about 82,000 parcels. So it's a good chunk of our county. And I'll show you a map later. But we inspect every parcel every year on CAUV. We do have some farmers who self-certify. They're your big industrial farmers, and essentially we know what's there. But we consider every parcel every year inspected. So when we go out and we look at a field of hay, for example, we can see the hay, we see the activity, or we see the tilling. With woodlands, it's a little bit of a different type of inspection to see activity. So that's why that management plan is so important. And we'll go out, we'll take pictures. As I joked at our education session on Monday, invite an auditor to come out. I'll come out in plaid and take a great photo. That was us looking at essentially how to go through the process. And there's John. I know that John's on the video too. So that will be kind of a conversation, and there's resources to help you with your management, either a forester, John with the state, other folks that Heather can point you to. We try and be a resource for our property owners. If there's a farmer who can no longer farm, for example, Heather can actually give that person a recommendation of different farmers in the area who will rent out land or help with forestry and assist in that way. So the key is we don't want to see you fail, and we don't want to see you leave the CAUV program. As Leah said, it's a preservation program at its very core. So that's a quick kind of look into our inspection process.
So the CAUV renewals we send out every year at the beginning of January. They're due the first Monday in March. Every year we send them, every year we want them back. Our county isn't too strict on, when that gets in. We just want to make sure that you are farming. But if you're not sending in those renewals, we will send you a certified letter saying, hey, if we don't get this, we're going to have to remove you. And we'll typically send that renewal again with that certified letter. And I think the next slide has what our renewal looks like.
Let me see here. Yep. Heather, can you see our
Yep.
renewal? Okay.
Okay, so this is what the renewal will look like. So once you're on the program, the following year, you'll receive this renewal. Now, one thing I'd still love to see changed is the renewal and the initial application. If you guys can see that it looks almost identical. I have a lot of people calling with confusion. Sometimes somebody bought a new piece of land. They had already filled out a renewal before they got the initial application to fill out as the new owner. And so there's a lot of confusion because they look almost identical. It'd be nice to get it changed, but we'll send these out. It'll already have it pre-populated. Number, your parcel number, your deeded acres. So kind of like the initial application, number 4 is only to be filled out if you have less than 10 acres, so you can show income. Number 5, you want to fill out if the property is changing this year, yes or no. Kind of like if you're going from pasture to corn, or if you're going to start planting trees in one of your crop fields. It's nice for us to know when we go out in our inspections. Now, other auditors might do this different. I know some other counties do, but number 6, because we do go out in the field every year, we don't need our landowners to fill out the acreage, only unless it's under a conservation program or practice, because it's not going to change how we value anything other than that conservation. So we don't have them fill that out. And then at the bottom, a signature and a date. Now, with people that are on for forestry, we actually started quite a few years ago sending the sheet over on the right-hand side. We understand as a regular farmer, you're out there every year. You're plowing the fields, you're spraying, you're planting. So you're out on the land every year. With forestry, I understand that you don't do that every year. You know, there's going to be a couple years where maybe you just need to let stuff grow. So this kind of worksheet gets you as the landowner out to be on the property once a year. And either you'll fill out your CAUV number and you'll check mark either during that year, this is the maintenance I did, or during this year, I went out and nothing needed to be done. That kind of helps our inspectors go out there and just kind of verify that, yes, they did all that, and to show that you're actually managing your woods. So it's a nice help.
Yep. There are some counties, like I said, interpretation, who rely solely on the renewal form to either keep people in CAUV or remove people from CAUV. For us, frankly, the renewal form is a legal requirement that we have to fulfill. But because we inspect every year, it's not a requirement for us to keep folks in the program or remove them, as Heather said.
So the Woodland benefits, like Leah kind of mentioned, you know, it's a really nice tax break by being on CAUV, you know, 60 to 70% possible savings. It's based off of your soils. You know, I'm not sure how much woodland management plans go for, but, you know, you can almost pay for it in the tax savings in just even a quarter of the year of how much.
When folks come in, I know typically whenever I walk through our conveyance room, you're there with the property owner, showing them their map of their property and the soil types that they have under their property, what the soil values could be. And essentially we can kind of give them a rough estimate or a rough look at, well, here's what you're going to be valued at. And instead of your market value, which in our county could be anywhere between 2,500 an acre to almost 10,000 an acre, they can be valued for woodlands at that administrative level of, in our county, I believe it's what now, $250 an acre?
The Woodlands is 230.
230. So yeah, tremendous savings, tremendous savings.
Yes. And I know too, on our website, we put together kind of like a list of over the years what the soil values were. I think starting in 2008 all the way up into 2020. So you can look at all the woodland soils and all the regular soils, and you can actually go back and look and kind of compare where they were and where they've been. So that's kind of a nice little take a look at that. So woodland CAUV penalties. So like Leah touched again, you know, if you decide to withdraw your land from CAUV, you don't fill out your renewal, or something changes, you're not following the plan, then we will add the 3-year recoupment. We do always make sure that we send a certified letter that you have to sign for before we remove it. We always give you enough time. Maybe we didn't see something, or something happened, because you are allowed 1 idle year for any reason. 2nd year idle or not following a plan, then we will, you know, have to probably take you to the board of revision.
And if a farmer has over 10 acres they're farming and they have non-commercial woodlands, so, you know, let's say a farmer has 15 acres of tilled property, they have 10 acres surrounding it of just woods, you know, if they were to not manage that, or if they were to really just leave it completely alone, they still can get the CAUV on those non-commercial acres. So this is just discussing when you have just commercial woodlands and CAUV, not the non-commercial surrounding woodlands. Yeah. So next slide. This is a little bit more, we want to touch base with recoupment and what it kind of will do to your tax bill.
So like I said, if they, sometimes we do have new landowners, maybe the property changed hands, and the new owner does not want to apply for CAUV. Or sometimes we might have people that are just getting too old and don't want to farm anymore. Sometimes when I give them recoupment estimates, they take a look and see how much they really did save, and they kind of want to rethink it a little bit. And also too, if it's not filed timely, or fails to meet the requirements. Some things that people don't understand about recoupment is it follows the parcel, not the person. So a lot of times if you do have a transfer, you know, if I get recoupment estimates from like a title company, and I might say, hey, this could be subject for removal, you might want to let them know and have them talk to them, because the recoupment is between buyer and seller. We have nothing to do with, you know, who is responsible for paying it, but it does follow the parcel, not the person. The recoupment will get added at the end of the year and show up for next year's tax bill. I know when you guys get your tax bill, I do get a lot of phone calls saying, hey, I'm not on CAUV. I applied it to CAUV recoupment 0. Well, that's why it says 0. You want it to say 0. I know on our tax bill, I'm not sure about other counties, but it will actually have in the description under your land, it'll have a CAUV number on there. And then once it's removed, then it'll be taxed at normal market value. But you do have the right to appeal that denial through the Board of Revision, which that's from January 1st up until March 31st. And then lastly, kind of like what Leah talked about, the differences between the Ohio Forest Tax Law, we kind of put together a little paper that we hand out to landowners if they're trying to decide which program is going to be better for them. Like Leah said, you know, there's not a timeline kind of when to apply for the Ohio Forest Tax Law program. There's no penalties. You know, with CAUV, there is, you know, penalties and a timeline. So I think this kind of helps the landowner kind of decide what program they want to be on. I know sometimes they'll ask me, well, what do you think? And you know, you really got to look at it. You know, if you get older and you can't manage it, you don't have anybody to help you, maybe CAUV isn't for you, or Ohio Forest Tax Law might be better. It's really kind of up to you guys.
The Ohio Department of Natural Resources oversees the Ohio Forest Tax Law. So essentially, your county auditor's office role with a form or some type of notification of, hey, parcel XYZ is correct?
Yes, ODNR will send, they'll send the application to ODNR, and then they will send Karen in our office. I think it's an acceptance letter that they're on the Ohio Forest Tax Law program.
Then when that happens, we'll apply the tax break of 50% to the taxes, the tax reduction for that property, and that's our involvement. ODNR will do the checks. They'll do essentially the relationship aspect with you, whereas with CAUV, we monitor constantly, and we have more of that kind of oversight aspect. So one's not better than the other. We've definitely seen a huge rise in folks moving from the Ohio Forest Tax Law over to CAUV. I think largely because of the higher savings in our county, but every county can be different depending on the situation with your office. And this was just another kind of how to apply for the Ohio Forest Tax Law versus CAUV for folks to be able to see later if you'd like more kind of concrete of the steps by steps of what to do. Ohio Forest Tax Law is statewide, and CAUV is as well, but Ohio Forest Tax Law administered by the state, CAUV administered by the local office. And the last slide here, we just kind of wanted to show you in green are the inspections that Heather did in 2022 in our county. This is Ashtabula County. We're the largest land county in the state of Ohio. All those green parcels are CAUV parcels. So we have a vast majority actually of our county in CAUV, especially in the southern part of our county. And as I explained on Monday, this is one of the reasons why we take this program so seriously in terms of inspections and making sure that folks are who are on the program or receiving the tax break should be on the program. And then folks who aren't on the program but deserve the tax break should be on the program. So we try and make sure that everyone's getting what they need to. For folks who are in more rural areas, you may actually see a higher tax rate than you may know of in more urban areas, depending on the level of CAUV or other credits that are happening. As I always tell our residents, local government tax revenue stays flat. Everything is a constant unless new levies are passed by the voters. And so if your revenue has to stay flat, and there are a good number of properties, for example, our southern townships of Colebrook and Wayne are almost completely CAUV. So in those townships, and their taxes through CAUV, the non-CAUV parcels have to make up the difference then to keep revenue flat to the schools, to the townships. And that's why their tax rate may be higher. So we make sure that folks are following the guidelines. And we've done, I think, a really strong job at encouraging people to be on the program if they're eligible. We've seen a huge increase every year of folks entering. But this is just kind of a quick snapshot of our county and how just prevalent and important CAUV is to the nature of our property owners. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions that may be specific to us or Leah as well.
Okay, and we have questions. So I'm going to scroll back up to, first of all, Mandy wants everyone to know that we're going to be sending out a resource list to all of you after the event, and we'll be sure to include the speakers and your county auditor's contact info in that. We should have your email addresses, especially if you registered through Eventbrite, so you don't have to worry about that. And then we'll start out with, how does it work if you are developing a commercial forest? We have about 5 acres of forest and want to convert an adjacent 5-acre parcel of farmland to forest. Can we apply for the forestry CAUV? And in this situation, would the forest management plan be focusing on planting trees and converting the use? Or does the forest need to be fully in place?
So Heather, how would we treat that, just as an example, in our county, if someone came to you?
I'm trying to read back over it to make sure I understood that. Where was that one at?
So basically, what she's saying is, right now, there's 5 acres of former row crop or so up against 5 acres of forest. Will her forest management plan have to be focused on planting trees, or could it be an overall management of the property? How does she need to treat that?
So I'm assuming she's still going to be farming those 5 acres. Or no, converting it. We would need to see that in a forest management plan. A lot of times we do see some people that have some open land that want to plant trees. We ask the forester to write a plan showing how many trees need to be planted per acre. And then we can start converting it over to forest land.
So I know oftentimes, and then there's a couple of foresters I think on here too, the property owner has quite a lot of leeway in terms of what they would like to see with their property, which is what we all want property rights to be an important thing. From our perspective, we would just need to see that plan that is from a certified person saying, here, if you follow this, then you will have a commercially productive crop at some point in the future. So you can work with your forester for however you'd like to see that property managed in the future of it. But to get in Ashtabula County, to get the CAUV Woodlands, you just need to have that management plan. Now, but Heather, with only 5 acres, that's below the 10-acre threshold. So with her having the adjacent 5 acres, it would have to be same like ownership.
Yes.
Under the same owners. You can have 2 or multiple parcels in CAUV, it just has to have the same owners.
Correct.
Okay.
Hey, Dave, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, this is John Keams, ODNR Division of Forestry. To answer that question for Ohio Forest Tax Law, the 5 acres could be planned, but it can't be added, the 5 acres that's open, until trees are established. And that's just, but we could add existing woodland, but once trees are established on that extra, then we could put it into the Ohio Forest Tax Law, which, as you said, Dave, then often people 3 years later switch to CAUV.
Wonderful, thanks, John. John was
So
one of
what
those
does
models-
established mean in this case? Could they be like 3-year-old seedlings or 5 years? What does established mean?
Generally, one of our parameters for an acre of woodland is it has to have 300 commercial stems alive per acre. So when we say established, it can be planted. Generally, it's about a year. They can be pretty small as long as you get good survival. That acre can be qualified as a forest tax law acre. That makes sense?
Yes. Okay, next question. I have a CAUV on about 50 acres in Geauga County in Bainbridge. Parcel has about 50 acres of mature woods. Can that be rolled into forestry CAUV with proper forestry plan?
Yeah, Heather, if that was our county, what questions would you ask the property owner? And what would we need to see for them to enter the program?
I guess the question is, if she has about 50 acres, does she have over 10 acres of cropland? So if it's over 10 acres of cropland, And if she's talking about just acres on one parcel, like, is it multiple parcels? Or, you know, would we consider it non-commercial? Is it same ownership? I'm not quite clear on kind of exactly how she's asking that. Because if she's got over 10 acres of cropland, it's non-commercial woodland, as long as if it's same ownership or if it's the same parcel. If it's less than 10, we would need to see a forest management plan.
This is Brent Klass, and I asked that question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's one parcel, and it's a CAUV with, we've been making hay for 20 years. And then I have mature woods. And I was just wondering, I was just trying to save on property taxes. A credit for the woods while I have my CAUV in place.
Do you have over 10 acres of cropland?
Well, yeah, I have about 50 pasture.
I would check with your county auditor, because like for ours, what you would automatically get is, because you're over the 10 acres of tillable land, you automatically get your woods on CAUV as non-commercial woodland. So I would double check with your auditor's office and see if they do have, if you are getting a tax break on your woods for having over the 10 acres of commercial use.
Well, thank you for your advice.
You're welcome.
But just to clarify, you can't, for example, get double credits. So it would just be CAUV. They would look at the soil values. And to, I think Leah's point earlier too, folks always kind of call our office and ask about tax changes to their property. And we're always happy to kind of dive into what happened with tax changes. Oftentimes it is value changes or new levies, and either CAUV stays constant or actually dips. But there can be a lot to unpack. So it's good to ask for sure too.
Okay, is it still possible to get someone out to develop a forestry management plan in time for the deadline?
So that's a good question. If you want to send me an email, Nikki, if you need me to, it's HRHALL@ashtabulacounty.us. I can send you out a list of foresters that we use for Ashtabula County. I'm not sure what their deadline is, if they'd be able to get it done or not. I would definitely check around, but we've got a big list that I can email you over. So you can see if somebody might be able to meet that deadline for you.
Can you say that email again?
Yeah, it's HRHALL@ashtabulacounty, all spelled out, .U, S as in Sam.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, and I gotta scroll back up and find. Okay, so Ronald asked, if you go from CAUV to the forestry program, is there recoupment?
Yes. I don't know, David, if there's anything in the law. I heard somebody mention maybe trying to change something, but
So there's always talk about different legislative changes. Recruitment's a hot button. I know at the last Farm Bureau, I think big group discussion, Mandy said there was a whole long discussion over recoupment, lots of different feelings on it for sure. And there's been some talk, from our association of allowing or having the legislature allow for deferment, for example. That's kind of a good example of, if you're keeping it preserved, why should there be a recoupment there? But as presently as we can see and interpret, we would have to apply a recoupment.
All right, and then if you get time, can you put a link to your Ashtabula website that has the soil values that you mentioned? If you want to add that to the chat, and we will include that in the resource page that we send out too. Fred asked, I received a CAUV renewal application from Geauga County for my approximate 30-acre property. Can you confirm that section 4 is not required to be completed? Also, I have about 9 acres of woods, no forest management plan, and 1 acre of wetlands. Do I need to complete section 5 and 6? The only change between 2022 and 2023 is, I lost it. I gotta go back up. rotation of crops on tillable acres. If I complete section 6, I'm unclear which category the wetlands should be reported in. Is it conservation practices versus roads, waste ponds, or other use?
So I would double check with your county auditor for some of those sections. I'd like number 4, require you to fill out the income portion because you have over the 10 acres of a commercial use. So, sometimes we may ask for proof of income just because we might be questioning if you're commercially farming it or not. Let's see, I'm going back through the rest of your question. Now, is the wetlands, do you have it under a wetlands reserve program? Because I believe that would be under the conservation line. But in our county, we would probably have you just put that under the roads, waste, or pond. Did I get everything, Suzanne, on that?
I think so, yeah.
Yes, that'd be another great example of making sure, and I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you over the phone or by email or going in person with the form. We can always pull up in our office. We have big computers right when you walk in, so you can look at maps, and Heather can actually map out certain things together with you, which for our large Amish population is a big help. They're probably some of the number one folks that come in the office for one-on-one help.
All right. Jane wanted to know if there happens to be anyone from Geauga County on the call who knows what percentage of acreage are on CAUV there. And while we wait for that answer, I'd say, I'll go on to the next one. I have recently purchased.
Andy answered it in the
Oh,
chat.
did
She
they?
answered
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. All right. I've recently purchased some farmland in Middlefield. I received a CAUV form asking me about farming. Does that mean it has previously been under CAUV, or do they send that to everyone who buys farmland?
So typically, if somebody did purchase a property on CAUV, we will send them out a new initial application. With our office, we adopted it last year. We will take a copy of that DTE Form 102 that buyer and seller had to sign and have notarized before the property transfers. So I always make sure I send a copy of that with a welcome letter stating why you're receiving that. And then, of course, the initial application. So it
And then-
sounds like it would have been on CAUV.
And that form that Heather was talking about, that DTE 102 form, that's essentially a form that buyer and seller both have to sign, stating if you were to take the property out of the CAUV, here's your estimated recoupment that the buyer, the new property owner, would be responsible for. So we don't want anyone to buy property in Ashtabula County and be surprised when they get a large bill for recoupment because they haven't been farming it, for example. So it's all about education and making sure that and your office, any of the offices should be able to estimate recoupment at any point too. But yeah, if it's a renewal form or initial application, and that $25 fee for new applications, we can't waive. We do waive though for death transfer. That's the only real time where we can actually not apply that fee.
And just to state to some people, renewals do not have a fee. It's just the initial application has the $25 fee.
I'd like to interject something, Heather, if I could.
Yeah.
You talk about the DTE 102, which is, it's a document that's presented at closing to let the new landowner know that that the property is in CAUV, and here's what you have to do to retain it for the new owner. We do not have such a mechanism with forest tax law properties. So if a buyer is buying a forest tax law property, it's not disclosed at closing that the property is in forest tax law. And we've had cases where sometimes it's not caught until a reconciliation report, and a landowner might lose it. It might get canceled for a year, and in some high rent areas, it can be a real problem.
I wonder, is that something that you could talk to the state about? Because I know the RGTE form is a state form. I don't know what the regulations will be for that.
Yeah, it's something I've been harping about for about 3 years.
I know, I think that the girls might try to check in our county. I know when there are transfers, they'll note if it's homestead. I'm not quite sure 100% about the forestry portion, but maybe, that's something we can maybe see if our girls in the conveyance room to kind of take a look and keep track of that as transfers go through.
Yeah, it's a problem that I personally thought we should address from our end, but it hasn't been done. So if it can be addressed.
We'll see what we can do.
All right, and if you haven't been following along in the chat, Mandy did answer the Geauga County question, and she said there are easily over 3,000 landowners enrolled in CAUV in Geauga. So we're looking forward to seeing some actual numbers or more refined numbers. She did ask that of the Geauga auditors on a Monday meeting. And other than that, I am seeing no further questions. So thank you so much, David and Heather, and Leah also. And before I let all of you go, if Mandy doesn't have anything else, I'm going to plug next month's Woodland Wednesdays.
That's what I was going to do, but you go right ahead.
I'm already on it. So Wednesday, March 1st from 2 to 4, it's called Leaves Are for Chumps, Winter Tree Identification. So you can learn how to ID trees from twigs, buds, bud scars, the bark, and the habitat around it without using leaves. Amaze your neighbors, impress your friends. It's going to be at Lantern Court Estate at Red Oak Camp, 9203 Kirtland Chardon Road in Kirtland, Ohio. And it is presented by Natalie Gertz Young of Lake Soil and Water and Eddie Laguki from Red Oak Camp. Mandy, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I was going to do just a quick plug. Just if anybody is from that area, we do have next month, Portage County is doing a CAUV as well. John Keene, who is on here with ODNR Division of Forestry, and then Sean Nepner with Trumbull Soil and Water Forestry. And Sean, I probably butchered your last name. I apologize. But he is our new forestry specialist. And then Kara McDowell from USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service will also be doing Does Your Money Grow on Trees, which is a CAUV session as well. So that is out as well. And then John Keene also shared today something I thought was pretty neat. So if anybody, any of our females, women owning woodlands, there is a virtual program on Thursday, February 23rd from 6:30 to 8:30. And it's going to talk about how you can plant trees more affordably, where you can find specific natives you're looking for, how you identify trees and shrubs. So it's a really great workshop for our women owning woodlands, and that's February 23rd from 6:30 to 8:30 virtually. So I will be putting together the rest of our resource list. I'll make sure that I include all of our presenters. If they're willing to share their presentations, that'll be in it as well. I will include all of the county auditors and how to contact them. And then it'll also have other resources. So your county soil and waters, Farm Bureau, and anybody else. And then I'll include these flyers for the upcoming events as well. And then we will also be doing a survey that we would love for you to participate in. That just helps us gauge the impact that this event has, and then also gather your feedback as we keep planning our Woodland Wednesdays, which we are very excited has reached over 1,000 people since we started it. So we are very excited about that. So it's an excellent team that has put this together. So we want to continue doing these, and your input would be greatly appreciated. So that is all I have.
All right, guys, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for attending, and hopefully we see you next month.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great night.
Bye.
Aw.
Oh, hi, buddy.
That's a future forester right there.